We had Colonel James Dutton here one year. Many of you remember he was one of the pilots for the space missions. And he took pictures from he landed the plane back safely when they returned. He took pictures right from the spaceship. And he was listening to one of my sermons when in space, Who is God? So he took that CD, put it in a frame along with a flag from India and a flag from the United States, framed it, came with one other astronaut to our office to present it to us. And James Dutton said to me, he said, out there, thousands of miles away, and you're looking at this tiny speck we call Earth and home. He said the grandeur was unexplainable. The incredible vastness of the universe that we live in. And we live in this tiny little speck we call Earth. He said, I was so overwhelmed that I would look out of that spaceship and say, how majestic is your name, O Lord. That's why the astronaut in 1968 on Christmas Eve could go nowhere else except to the scriptures when they went round the dark side of the moon and saw Earth rise over the horizon in that brilliant combination of blue and white, garlanded by the glistening light of the sun against the black void of space. The only thing that came to their mind was, in the beginning, God. Only God was big enough to capture this awe-inspiring reality, the glory of God. And when the glory of God departed, what happened? Ichabod was writ large. Eli was an old man, and unfortunately he'd messed up with his boys. And 2 boys were killed in the battle. And the messenger comes and says, I got bad news for you. Your 2 boys have been killed. But then they said, the Ark of the Covenant has been taken from our midst, which signified the presence of God. And his daughter-in-law was about to give birth. And his daughter-in-law said, I'm going to call my son Ichabod, because the glory of God had departed. No more substance, no more light, no more presence. These 3 realities is what glory actually signifies. And you hear the voice of God where he is present. Where the glory of God dwells, there the voice of God is heard. That's why in Ezekiel 10, his voice, Ezekiel 43:7 here, the voice was like the sound of many waters. Now what I want to talk to you about is, after the transfiguration experience, when they go back, Peter talks about it as an apologist. He says, we are not following cunningly devised fables, but we were eyewitnesses to his majesty. We are not following cunningly devised fables, but we were eyewitnesses to his majesty, as a light shining in a dark place. And you would do well to pay heed to it. And then he says this, but now we have the word of the prophets made more certain. More dramatically certain than just the voice of God in a display of glory is the word of God that carries the narrative of what he intends for you and me. So if you really want to know what the glory of God intends, it is what he intends in your life and mine. And if you don't understand his glory, you don't understand how fearfully and wonderfully we are really made. We are made to reflect that essential splendor of God's substantiveness and God's luminosity. We need to be bright lights in a dark world. Now, why does the glory depart? I will race through this very quickly. The glory departs, number 1, because there was no internalization of the truth. Truth is never intended to be a mere externality. Truth is intended to be internalized. It has to be that which comes from within you, not just that which comes from outside you. That's really what happens at conversion. When you are newly born, when you and I have that new birth, and the presence of God comes and lives within us, the divine imperative takes over. Yea, nay, yea, nay. That voice that comes from within. And when that voice gets garbled, it is the word to which you go to find the clarity once again, how he intended us to live. In this dark world today, we go anywhere but here to find out what God's will is of how we should live. hence the darkness. We are as confused a culture as I have ever seen in 45 years of ministry. There are no answers out there. In fact, there are only questions after questions after question. And when you see a person from whose eyes you see the brightness of God's presence, and from whose words you hear the substantiveness of what life is all about, you understand why knowing Christ brings that brilliant light in your eye. As we were listening to Jack and Shauna last night, he saw something in her eyes that he'd never seen anywhere else. He saw that beauty, saw that brilliance. Why in heaven's name are you looking so happy? What makes you shine like this? You know, there are two great soccer players in our time, amongst many others. One is Lionel Messi from Argentina, and the other is Cristiano Ronaldo from Portugal. And they're always at each other as to who's number one and who's number two. And Ronaldo was being interviewed by the media, and he made the comment that he believed God had sent him into the world so that people could learn how to play soccer and show how soccer ought to be played. So when he finished that statement, another interviewer went to Lionel Messi and said, what do you think of Ronaldo's statement that God sent him into the world in order to teach people how to play soccer? Messi said, I honestly tell you, I don't remember sending him. We have this extraordinary opinion of how great we are. And athletes, I suppose it goes with that kind of ability to be braggarts as well. Very few people brag as much as an athlete does. Of course, when you can pitch a no-hitter, you feel pretty important. When you can hit a grand slam, you feel you've really made it big. Millions have watched you do that. But then the body begins to get frail, and you no longer can throw like that. You no longer can hit like that, and then you wonder, where's the glory? Wherein lies the glory? The people I have seen who have that glory most are those who have really lived with the internal imperatives of how God wants you to live. I'll tell you the truth, and I'm not making this up. Many a time I wish to myself, I could say I'm done. I've paid my dues, 45 years, millions of miles. I can tell you what every aircraft looks like, feels like, and who does the best service and who doesn't do very good service, who makes the worst tea. I can tell you all of that stuff. But there's only one thing that keeps me going, and that is the firm belief that more than ever, this gospel is the only shining light against the dark background of a confused and messed up world. Robert Jaffray was a great preacher. The last 3 years of his life he spent in a Japanese internment camp. He was heir to Canada's largest newspaper, the Globe and Mail. But he started to study Chinese, and the Standard Oil Company wanted to hire him. He decided instead to become a missionary. I have some of his books in my library, Robert Jaffray. And finally, the Standard Oil Company offered him a huge salary to come and work for them instead of being a missionary. He turned it down. They wrote back and doubled it. He turned it down. Finally, they sent him a telegram, Jaffray, at any price. He wrote back with one line as well. Your salary is big. Your job is too small. Your salary is big. Your job is too small. You see, your job and my job is to be that bright light wherever we are, to do it and to shine in this very dark world. It's the Jaffrays of the world that opened up China so that today we see the results of how profoundly they had an impact. The internalization of truth, there was no internalization. Number two, there was no concern for the poor and the marginalized in society. When I started Wellspring International, my heart, Shalini was very correct. I did what I did for Wellspring because I was raised by a mother who never ever walked by somebody with need without doing something for them. Even when I moved to Canada, when I would pack my suitcase, she would ask me to take 2 suitcases, one for the needy and the poor, and I could come back with that suitcase empty if I so chose. Clothes, money, goods, watches, things like that. My mother wasn't a very wealthy woman, but she had a very tender heart. And God has called us to be a compassionate people, to be there for the needy. Always love it when I see Naomi presenting that need. Many of you here were involved in buying that land for the building of a hospital. That is the next great stage to treat burn victims. But many of you may know that the greatest blessing I ever received, the greatest benediction I ever received, was from a beggar in Delhi. As I saw him walking with one leg, pushing himself, one leg gone, the other bandaged up with pus marks and blood marks on the other, and pushing himself like this, I felt so much pity and compassion for him. I wanted to give him something immediately, but I didn't do it because I knew I'd be invaded by several others. So from a distance, I walked behind him till he pushed himself across the road somewhere, and there were a little less people on the other side. I went over to him, and I said, Bhai Sahab, ek minute theriye. Brother, sir, pause a minute. And I knelt beside him, and I put a little money into his hand. It was a 100-rupee note. And I said, Yesu Masih ke naam se, in the name of Jesus Christ, hum aapko de rahe hain. I'm giving this to you, respected sir. He opened his hand like that to see it was a 100-rupee note. I don't know if he'd ever received that in his life. It was big for him. For me, it was $1.50. And he looked at it like that and looked at me, and his eyes flooded with tears, and he said, Saab ji, respected sir, Bhagwan aapko bhala kare. May God richly bless you. It's the best benediction I have ever received from a man who couldn't have given me anything except his good wishes and his prayer. And what happened in those days, as the poor were ignored and lost their way for the needy, God said, my glory is going to leave your presence. It was not internalized. Secondly, he told them that the most powerful were going to be humiliated. Chapter 27, I won't go into the details. They had become so confident in themselves, this self-aggrandizement, that they could do it and wing it on their own way. How tempting that is for you and me when we meet success to think we have done it. G.K. Chesterton, Winston Churchill said to a corporal once, who looked at him and said, I want you to know, sir, I am a self-made man. Churchill said, you have just relieved God of a very solemn responsibility. We're not self-made. The lines fall in the right places. The right people come into your life. And that's why my book, Walking from East and West, has very little to do really about me. But the people that came into my life, that opened doors and made it possible for me to study, to work, to prepare. And my professors, till this day, I revere my professors so greatly. Norman Geisler, John Warwick Montgomery, John Gerstner, John R.W. Stott, J.I. Packer. I was studying under the best of them, Kenneth Cancer. I owe so much to them, I'm afraid this is being recorded, that some of them start to exploit that now. Just 3 days ago, I got a letter from Norman Geisler, we have to have you. I know you'd want to do this for me. I said, I will do it for you, sir. If I am free, I will be there because I studied at your feet. I learned at your feet. Without you, no doors would have been opened in philosophical thinking and this kind of argumentation for me. But if you think it's all about you, all of a sudden a sickness or a disease or something fells you and you find out you are not what you thought you were. The body begins to weaken and the body begins to fail. But here's what I want to tell you. Even in weakness, even in that brokenness, God's glory is the only hope you can have to lift you above that brokenness. That's what God shows to them. You know, I used to love track and field. I used to be a runner. I would never have made it to the big leagues, but I used to love. I must have had early hip issues and back issues early in life. I wanted to be a sprinter. I couldn't make it, so I became a long-distance runner. I loved to run the long distances. And every time the Olympics come, I would watch the track and field. It was the highlight for me every time, especially the 100 meters or the middle distances, 800 meters, or all the way to the mile or the marathon. I'd watch it. Running is an exhilarating thing, and when you watch the finest runners, it's a beautiful thing to behold. In the Olympic Games of Barcelona 1992, there was an English runner by the name of Derek Anthony Raymond. I don't know how many of you know that name. He was a very brilliant runner. They were expecting him to win the 400 meters. Derek Raymond was it. They came to the finals, and the gun was sounded. He's running towards the 400-meter mark. At the 125-meter mark, he stops and clasps his leg. He's pulled a hamstring. He falls. They come and bring him a stretcher. He says no. And he gets up and he's hobbling over, and out of the crowd there's a man running down, and the security's trying to get to him until he just said these words, "I'm his father." And Derek's dad, big guy, is pushing everybody aside. He comes onto the track and they don't know who he is. He's pushing him aside, said, "That's my son." And the father comes beside Derek and he's hobbling like this. And he comes and puts his arm around him and he said, "I'm going to do this myself, Dad." He said, "That's fine, son. Let me help you at least half the way." And so he puts his arm around Derek, and Derek's got his hand on his shoulder. See it on the YouTube. It's beautiful. And in the background is the music playing. He lifts me up. He raises me up. And there he is on the shoulder of his dad, hobbling. And the dad did something amazing. With about 5 meters to go, he pulled away and let Derek breast the tape on his own. I don't know who won that event, but I know who was the real winner in what happened that day. And when you know that he raises you up when your head is on his shoulder, he lifts you up and that hamstring has felled you. He comes to carry you out of a crowd of people. That's my son. I'm his father. I want you to know that the glory of God is at its greatest when you and I are at our weakest. And he comes and says, "Put that head on my shoulder. I'm going to carry you through." The longer I live, the more I realize everybody lives with at least a partially broken heart. At least a partially broken heart, if not a totally broken heart. And it has been said, when you preach to a hurting audience, you will never lack for one. You unpack people's hurt and pain, and you will hear a lot of hurt and pain. The glory of God is at its greatest when you put your head on his shoulder and say, "I can't finish this race. Help me." And he will do it in such a way, when you come to the finish line, he'll say, "You now go." Just like he brought Peter half the way, and so now you find Rhoda's house. You'll get there the rest of the way as he sent the angel. The glory of God is at its greatest when we are at our weakest and we realize I need his shoulder on which to put my head. When you and I learn that, the weightedness of God and the luminosity of God shines in the path ahead, and you know you're in secure hands and shoulders that are holding you up. Derek's victory was a victory of a father and son, and of a crowd of people, the glory of that. So you see how it was not internalized, how the most powerful realized they needed a shoulder. Thirdly, but the silence of God intensified when he was gone. Martin Luther cried a prayer once I have never forgotten. "Bless us, Lord, yea, even curse us, but please be not silent." Bless us, Lord, yea, even curse us, but please be not silent. How do you hear the voice of God? There are only 2 or 3 ways that I know. Number 1, by reading his word. Number 2, by living out that word, because that draws you closer to him, and he knows you mean business. Number 3, by spending time with people who listen to God's voice, and you draw that strength from them. Make friends of those who will inspire and bless you and equip you. Sooner or later in life, you're going to need that voice of God through somebody else to come into your life. When I was ready to graduate in Toronto, I had developed some vocal nodules because I'd preached in Vietnam. I'd preached 3 or 4 times a day for 4 months, and my voice was shot. It was gone. And I came back, and my throat was hurting every time I spoke, and so I went to see a medical doctor. And he looked at my throat, examined me, and he said, "What are you going to do in your life?" I said, "I'm planning to be a speaker." He said, "No, not going to happen." He said, "You don't have the vocal cords to use it professionally. You don't have the vocal cords to use it professionally." So the next day I went to school, and I was just walking around. I was really down. I said, "Is that true? I thought I was going to do just that, speak for my Lord." And the chancellor of the college, Dr. Stuart Beamer, Margie knew him well too. He saw me walking. He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "Come on up to my office." So I went up. He said, What's bothering you?" So I told him. He said, "Ravi, don't listen to him." He said, "I've watched you preach. I've heard you preach. God's got his hand on you. I'm going to get you in touch with the best laryngologist that I know in this country. If he tells you that, I'll believe it. Otherwise, I won't." So he sent me to see a Dr. Silverthorne. And Dr. Silverthorne looked at me and he said, "No problem. We'll take care of it. It may take you off the road for about 5 weeks, but you'll be fine." Here I am now, 45 years later, speaking all over the globe. If it weren't for Dr. Stuart Beamer and those doctors, I don't know if I would be here. Always listen to godly wisdom. You and I may think we have all the answers. Make friends of people you revere and respect. Their voice needs to be heard. I love my board. We've just come through a tough time with personal attacks on me. And it's my board members and colleagues that had that voice of encouragement. My colleagues at work, Vince, Michael, others, I can name all of you, sending me scripture verses, God's going to carry you through. God's going to carry you through. And it's what carried me through, his word and his presence to all of that. He will not abandon you if you will listen to his voice through his word, live out that word, and make friends of those whom you revere and trust. Otherwise, the silence of God will intensify. And lastly, he set their theology straight. They kept saying the days are prolonged and every vision faileth. They were moving to cynicism. They said perhaps a single righteous man can save us, Noah or Daniel or Job. They were moving to escapism, cynicism, escapism. And lastly, well, the fathers of eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. We've got fatalism, cynicism, escapism, fatalism. He says, no. I am going to return into your midst. The last words of the book of Ezekiel, God is there. Those are the last words of the book of Ezekiel. If you just ever get back to it and turn to it at home, it ends with the words, the new city, the new radiance, the new everything, and the word, the Lord is there. Jehovah Shammah, Yahweh Shammah, the Lord is there. What do I wish for this ministry? More than anything else, as I hear these younger voices, it inspires me, absolutely inspires me. I couldn't ask for a better team to work with. My greatest prayer is no matter what happens at RZIM, people will always be able to say, the Lord is there. The Lord is there. The Lord is there. That if people look at my life, they may say, the Lord is there in Ravi's life. As the people look at you, may they say, the Lord is there. You're our friends. You face the same struggles we do with your family, with your children, with grandchildren, whatever. But if the Lord is in your life and present in your life, it's the only hope in a dark, dark world. The luminosity of God, the substantiveness of God. Glory, kavod in the Old Testament. Glory, doxa in the New Testament. You don't have to wake up every morning in the dark. You can wake up every morning in the light if the Lord is with you and the Lord is there. The more you understand his glory, the more you will understand why you were made. Without that glory, you will be sent over to nothing more than dust. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. You are not just a body, you are a soul. No, the soul doesn't return to dust, it returns to its maker, and that shining light
You've been watching Let My People Think with Dr. Ravi Zacharias. We're grateful for your prayers and financial support. If you'd like to know more about this ministry or would like to donate to our efforts, you can call us at 1-800-448-6766 or visit us online at www.rzim.org. You can also stay connected to RZIM through Twitter and Facebook. Our mailing address is RZIM, Post Office Box 1820, Roswell, Georgia 30077. The purpose of RZIM is to engage meaningfully with the questions and heartfelt issues of our culture. We do that in areas of business, academia, politics, the arts, and media. We live in an age of confusion, and people from every continent are beginning to wonder whether there are any answers to life's biggest questions. And this has provided a remarkable opportunity for the gospel of Jesus Christ. RZIM consists of over 50 speakers and adjuncts operating in over 20 countries, working at every level to reach those who shape the culture of a country and its future direction with the gospel. In addition to taking the gospel to various arenas of influence, we are also committed to providing a variety of training events in order to meet people where they are and to answer their questions directly. Whether it's engaging young adults and students through Reboot, Remind, and Big Deal questions, or the training we offer through the OCCA, RZIM Academy, and the New Zacharias Institute, we want to be able to take the questions that often serve as barriers to belief and instead use these as opportunities to share the gospel. By clearing those barriers, we can equip people to then engage with their friends, family, colleagues, and institutions. Our purpose is not only to increase people's knowledge, but to address the obstacles that stop people from seeing the credibility and beauty of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Ministries, Atlanta, Georgia.